Prelude to Coude. The Adventures of the Empyrean Guard. By E.W. Barnes. Digital voice narration. Chapter 5. Zadok waited for Ira under a spreading tree, thick with leaves and reaching boughs, standing on the other side of a plaza from the hostel where their quarry hid. He assumed Ira went along with Jarvo to not draw attention to themselves, in case the kid reacted badly to a rejection. The last thing they wanted was a public spectacle, or to earn the ire of the border protectors. And as much as he disliked the delay, her decision to go with the kid was the logical one, and Zadok knew it would not take Ira long to disable the young man and return. There were many people in the plaza, almost exclusively Homo sapiens, he noted, and most of them were making their way to the hostel. Many seemed to know each other, and there was a festive atmosphere, as if they were there for a reunion or party. That could be a good circumstance, he thought. A noisy crowd could be used as a cover, especially if the deserter refused to return peacefully. Having memorized the dossier on the deserter, Zadok reviewed the details again as he watched for his leader's return. The deserter's name was Gorbin of Tertia. A mid-level officer in the space fleet, Gorbin had been stationed on a battleship, patrolling the belligerents when he jumped ship. Outer Forces investigations tracked him to a merchant vessel that made stops at Vision, Octa, and Serenissima Nuova. Local law enforcement on Vision confirmed the man did not disembark there, and military intelligence opted to use insertion units to extract him if he was discovered on one of the other planets. The Sentinels to Ger were assigned to Octa, and the Empyrean Guard to Serenissima Nuova. But it was not until they exited the faster-than-light conduit as they arrived that they received confirmation that Gorbin of Tertia was here. Gorbin's motivation for deserting was a mystery. Neither his service record nor his psychiatric profile suggested desertion behavior, and offered no clues as to what made him leave when he did. His evaluations showed he was a dedicated officer with a strong loyalty to the Outer Union. He left behind parents on Tertia, whom he had previously visited regularly. They had not heard from him since his disappearance, and their interviews indicated that they too were at a loss and could offer no reasons for why he would abandon his post without leave. Zadok spent little time pondering that enigma, however. He could use the background information to assess their quarry, but their job was to return to headquarters with Gorbin. The magistrate judge could sort out the why later. The stream of people going into the hostel grew, and just as Zadok was considering moving to a better vantage point to watch for Ira, she turned up next to him. "That didn't take long," he said. "We need to talk," she said in a clipped voice, not moving her lips. "Not now. Later." She jutted her chin toward the hostel. "After." She joined the crowd flowing into the lobby, Zadok on her heels. There was a stiffness in her movements that put him on edge. Something had happened with the kid, something that alarmed his usually unflappable leader. He knew her well enough to know what would happen next. Instead of easing into the op, she would drive forward now with single-minded purpose. Get the job done and get out, finesse be damned, a method used more often by Fulgar and Merlina. As a Glassondian, he instinctively found unyielding tenacity to be objectionable, but after years with the Outer Forces and the Empyrean Guard, he had come to understand that implacability had its place. The hostel lobby was not an elegant space. Decorated in shades of beige and brown, it was functional and barely welcoming. A facility designed for people to hurry through, either to their room or onto their next destination. Ira stopped next to a potted bush, the only green in the room. It was thick with foliage that danced in the breeze blowing in from the entrance. "I'm going to risk another ping," she said in a monotone, using the white noise of the whispering fronds to cover the sound of her voice. "Found him," she said a moment later. "He hasn't moved. Still in a sleeping room in the northwest corner of the building. Ground floor," she grunted. "That will make things easier. Shall we try the out and in approach?" She smiled in agreement, though her smile was tense. "Cover all the exits," she nodded. "I'll go outside, wait by the window. You stay inside, come through the door. Whoever grabs him first, the other buys the drinks." "Deal." She pushed her way upstream of the flow of people entering the lobby and disappeared outside. For Zadok, the crowd entering the hostel was conveniently headed in the direction he needed. He merged with the group, though trying to blend in was made difficult by his being a head taller than everyone else. Very few noticed him, though. There was an underlying energy that caught his attention, an electric feeling he could see in bright eyes, excited expressions, and low, rapid conversations. Someone clutched his arm. "I know you." A woman watched him with narrowed eyes. He recognized her as the border protector, who had inspected the Turum. "Officer Sarixa," he said. "How nice to see you again." "I knew you'd be here," she said, not letting go of his arm. "They said a Glissondian was coming tonight, and I knew as soon as I saw you on your ship that you were the one." He did not know what she was talking about. "Did you?" he asked politely. "What else did they say?" "That the time has come," she said, almost in a whisper. "That soon we will be called upon to act, to fight back." Her eyes mirrored the almost feverish excitement he saw in the others in the crowd. The word fervor came to mind, and a chill ran down his spine. Soon, they moved out of the lobby and approached a large meeting space. If he was to reach the deserters' quarters at the same time as Ira, he needed to break away now and take a connecting corridor to the northwest sleeping rooms. But Officer Sarixa hung onto his arm, her hands like claws, and he was caught in the movement of the crowd. He would have to wait for the flow to ebb, to break away. He allowed Officer Sarixa to usher him into the meeting space, with the intention of quickly extricating himself from her and exiting. The crowd still entering behind him pushed him further into the room. Close by, a tall, thin man stood, greeting new arrivals and accepting compliments and admiration, the Glissondian that Sarixa had mistaken him for. As unusual as it was for one of his planet to be in outer Union space, it was not the Glissondian that drew his attention, but the conformable composite box on the floor next to him. It was a cage in which a corvid was imprisoned. His eyes widened as he recognized her. It was Merlina. Chapter 6. Ira crept along the northwest side of the hostel, which abutted the green space she had visited with Jarvo. The deserters' room would have a pleasant view of the park, and the thick greenery gave her cover in which to hide her movements as she neared the window she was looking for. She crouched under the sill and waited for Zadok to knock on the door. After that, either the deserter would open the door, in which case Zadok would disable him and the mission would be accomplished. Or he would attempt to escape via the window, and Ira would be the one to incapacitate him. His psychological profile suggested it was unlikely he would put up a fight, such as holding them off by barricading himself in the room or attacking them, hoping to go out in a blaze of glory. Still, they were prepared with backup plans. They were the Empyrean Guard, after all. Time ticked by. She heard the deserter moving about the room, the creak of furniture as he sat, and felt a faint vibration when he walked across the floor. Still, Zadok did not knock. It was taking too long, she thought. Something was wrong. For a moment she agreed with Fulgar, grating against the restrictions placed on this mission, and the inability to use her comm channel to find out what happened to her second-in-command. But the goal was the retrieval of the deserter. That was her priority, no matter how much she wanted to assuage her concern for her teammate. With a feeling of frustration, she conceded to herself that one of those backup plans was about to come into play. She crept back to the front of the hostel. The crowds had finally thinned, and it was easy to slip inside the adjacent clothing shop unnoticed. "May I use your communications console?" she asked a bored-looking clerk. "My portable's malfunctioning." The clerk nodded toward the console on the wall without looking at her. "Help yourself." Ira connected with the hostel host, and with a little coaxing, after describing her quarry to him, he connected her to Gorbin's room. "Hello?" Gorbin's voice was tentative. "Is this Karaxa?" Ira asked. "You have the wrong person. I know who you are. We're coming for you." Then she hung up. If the man's psychological profile was accurate, he would perceive the call as a threat, an invasion of his protected space, and would feel forced to find a new hiding place. Now she just had to guess correctly. Would he flee out the door or through the window? The odds were even, she estimated, but her instincts told her he would choose the window, and she returned to her hiding place in the bushes outside his room. As she hoped, just moments after the leaves and branches stopped shivering from her arrival, Gorben pushed open the window. He stuck his head out, his shaggy blonde hair dull in the dim light of the second sun. His eyes passed over the shadows within which she hid, and he gave no sign that he saw her. He edged a small bag through the window and dropped it. It hit her shoulder and rolled away, coming to a halt at the base of a large bush. Damn. He might not see her, but the change in the trajectory of the bag alerted him to her presence. With a muted oath, he leapt out of the window, angling high and away from the building and out of her reach. He scooped up the bag and took off running. Echoing the man's curse, Ira sped after him. He was fast, faster than she would have expected, dodging trees and leaping shrubs in his haste to get away from her. He rounded a tree bright with luminous blooms, and as she passed it, she leapt up, snatching a blossom from a low-hanging branch. Careful to hold the flower by its stem, she put on more speed. She focused on the rhythm of her strides and ignored the stitch in her side. Soon she was within arm's reach of him. She was relieved to see his sleeves ended just below his elbow. With a lunge, she pressed the flower against the skin on his exposed forearm. He gasped and rubbed his arm, but kept on running. Unable to stop herself from falling, she threw the flower away before she hit the ground with a grunt. She rolled, getting back to her feet quickly, but there was no catching him now. She would have to wait for the toxin in the flower to do its work. She followed him at a jog and found him curled up under a bush not far from where she had fallen. He moaned and clutched his arm. It had turned green where the petals touched the skin. His eyes bulged when he saw her. "Please don't kill me," he begged in a wheeze. A thin line of drool ran off his chin. "Gorben of Tersha," she panted. "I am Ira of Sixton, leader of the Empyrean Guard. Under the authority of the outer forces, I'm taking you into custody for desertion." Your outer forces?" he asked through numbed lips. "I am," she nodded. She eased him into a sitting position and secured his arms in binders. "You're not with him?" "With who?" He looked in all directions, or it could have been his eyes rolling. "Lumel," he whispered. Ira frowned at him. "Who's Lumel?" "Shush. Don't speak so loudly. He might hear you." Ira studied their surroundings carefully. They were alone, she was certain of it. "There's no one else here," she reassured him. "He can hear many things from many places." "Please," his voice cracked. "You must take me away from here." There was a hysterical edge to Gorben's voice. She watched him with narrowed eyes as he groaned and panted. The toxin of Nona tree flowers rarely caused hallucinations, but it was possible Gorben was especially sensitive to it. She extracted a broad-spectrum antidote from the medical kit in her jumpsuit. "I will take you away from here," she said as she administered the antidote. "You will be safe so long as you cooperate." Yes, Gorben agreed as he closed his eyes. His breathing slowed and his color improved. The green on his arm faded away. He opened his eyes, focusing on her. "What did you do to me?" "I poisoned you," she said as she got him to his feet. His eyes bulged. "You what?" "It's not deadly," she said with a chuckle. "Just enough to slow you down. But I think you're more sensitive to it than most people." "What does that mean?" "People don't often have hallucinations." "I hallucinated?" "Something about some guy who can hear things." Gorben's face paled again. "Lumel." Ira furrowed her brow. "He's a real person." "Not a person," Gorben breathed. "A deity." "A deity," Ira repeated incredulously. "He is the stone-faced one who reads the evil in your heart." Gorben gulped. "You must get me off this planet." Ira nudged him in the spaceport's direction. "That's the plan." Good, Gorben muttered as he stumbled ahead of her before turning to look back at her. "You really are outer forces. You're not one of them, right?" "I really am outer forces," she answered, wondering who they were. Good. He was steadier on his feet now, and they were making good time. He is why I fled the Meridian, he murmured. This Lumel was on the Meridian? No, he does not leave his planet. It was the others, his followers. Refugees from the IC. We picked them up in the belligerence. One evening I was sitting alone at mealtime, and they asked to sit with me. After a while, they offered to tell me of their beliefs, and I thought, why not? I liked what they had to say, and joined their worship services. But then Lumel spoke to me, and everything changed. How did he speak to you, if he was not on the Meridian? I heard his voice in my mind. Ira eyed Gorban doubtfully. It was more likely these refugees found a way to sabotage the man's seats. Or that his psychological profile urgently required updating. She made a note to report the conversation to military intelligence as soon as possible after she secured Gorban on the Turum. Then she would find out what happened to Zadok. How did that change things, she asked Gorban. He glanced at her with a flinty expression. Have you ever encountered proof of divinity? She frowned. I can't say that I have. I used to sit in my quarters on the Meridian and stare out into space, wondering if there was something more. Then I found it. Is that why you deserted? Because you discovered proof of divinity? Gorban stopped in his tracks. I left the Meridian because Lumel instructed me to sabotage my ship. Chapter 7. As soon as she saw the Glissondian, Officer Syrixa glared at Zadok and dropped his arm. Ignoring Zadok, she pressed herself into the admiring throng gathered around the tall stranger. Zadok took a step back. As much as his instincts demanded that he first free Merlina, the mission took priority. He had to get to Gorban's room. Once they captured the deserter, they would rescue Merlina. The thin Glissondian extracted himself from the ring of admirers and moved to the front of the room. The crowd turned to watch him, waiting breathlessly in the rapt silence. Zadok eased himself toward the exit, but the doors shut when the Glissondian moved. To Zadok's frustration, burly men took up positions blocking the exit. It seemed no one was allowed in or out once the meeting started. Dismayed, Zadok edged away until he stood against the wall close to the cage. He ran through his options. He could fight his way out, but then he would lead possible pursuers right to Ira and the deserter, which would likely blow the mission. Circumstances required he go in a different direction. He quickly made a decision. If he could not get to Gorban, he would rescue Merlina. There was no movement within the cage except for the steady rise and fall of her breathing. Merlina was probably unconscious, otherwise she would be making a deafening racket in protest of her captivity. He would have to administer a stimulant once he released her. Even though she was only half his size, he could not carry the stocky corvid back to the spaceport, especially on the run. First things first, though. He had to get her out of the cage and out of the room without being caught. Welcome, my friends, the Glissondian said, raising his hands. To Zadok, it almost looked like a benediction. A woman in the crowd moaned, almost in ecstasy as he spoke. I am Ronar of Glissond. We welcome you, Ronar, the crowd murmured respectfully. Everyone's attention was fixed on this Ronar, including the man and woman who stood guard over the cage, who stared at him with the same reverence and, possibly, fear. Ronar cleared his throat. I'm pleased to announce that our operation is a go. Are you ready? There was cheering and shouts of yes, and we are ready. Everything is in place to disrupt the power to the spaceport, a man piped up, his companion nodding her head vigorously. As soon as you give the order. Ronar smiled. Very good. Zadok pressed his back against the wall with surprise. This was worse than he thought. He had somehow stumbled into a conspiracy. He remembered Ira's strange behavior after going off with the Jarvo kid. Had she heard something about this? It became even more urgent that he get out of there, and fast. Officer Syrixa raised her hand. I've planted locators on all ships that have arrived from the Outer Union during the last several days, she said. Once the spaceport is locked down, we can search the ships. I suggest we divide up into teams. And we'll catch all the Corvid infiltrators, another man shouted with glee. Corvid infiltrators. Zadok frowned. Which Corvids? Infiltrating what? He glanced at the cage and realized that many in the crowd had turned to stare balefully at it. You are correct, my friends, Ronar said. We captured an infiltrator today, I'm pleased to say. The man and woman guarding the cage smiled pridefully as the group applauded them. Ronar continued. With your help, we will put a stop to the Corvid threat for good. The room erupted in cheers. Now let us complete our preparations. The group surged toward Ronar, eager to join his team or receive recognition and accolades for their suggestions and contributions. This was it, Zadok realized, as the man and woman guarding the cage pushed into the crowd, leaving Merlina unattended. He approached the cage as if taking over guarding it. Merlina, he whispered, his voice barely audible. An onyx eye opened a fraction, and Zadok nearly laughed with relief. She was awake, pretending to be unconscious. That would make things easier. He glanced at the people clustered around Ronar. They were too involved in finalizing their plans to notice him. Even the burly men at the doors were watching the discussion closely, though they had not moved from their positions. Zadok and Merlina would still need to get through them somehow before the rest of the group gave chase. And the chase would be fast and fierce, Zadok was certain. The fervor was too intense, the focus too strong for him to assume that surprise would gain them much time. As soon as Ronar saw what was happening, he would command his followers to stop them, and they would, or die trying. But if he and Merlina could safely get out of the hostel, they would have a chance. What he needed was a diversion. The room was almost empty, with only low seats to accommodate the attendees. There were no tables to hide behind, or technological equipment he could rig to create a distraction. His eyes fell on the cage. It was large enough to contain a corvid. And it was made of basic, conformable composite, a building material that could be found anywhere in the Outer Union, used for furniture, spaceship construction, and Outer Forces combat gear. Hiding his movements, he pulled a conformable composite fabricator from inside his jumpsuit. If they caught him with it, it would violate mission rules and break his cover, but he had to risk it. He pushed the fabricator against the side of the cage, which immediately deformed, rising away from Merlina. A gap opened through which she could waddle. The corvid. The screech came from a man, full of fear and anger. The group turned as one, facing them, mouths open, eyes ablaze. A man by the doors stepped toward them, menace radiating from him. And that was all Merlina needed. Wings outstretched, with a leap that would have made her flying ancestors proud, she landed between the two men at the doors. Her talons flashed, obsidian knives that left legs bleeding, and the men staggering. Stop it. Stop the corvid. It was Ronar who shouted this time. His voice was full of command, and his people responded. They ran towards Merlina. Down. Zadok bellowed. He threw himself toward the doors, dragging what was left of the cage, still growing into an uneven, conformable composite wall. Merlina flattened herself against the floor, and Zadok's momentum carried him into the doors, shoving them open. Merlina scrambled out into the corridor, and Zadok pulled the conformable composite wall toward him, wedging it against the doorframe. It was enough to slow Ronar's people down, at least for a moment. Now we run? Merlina cackled gleefully. The alley door is closest, Zadok said. Full circle, Merlina replied as she waddled at top speed toward the hostel entrance. But Zadok knew Merlina's top speed might not be fast enough. Chapter 8. Zadok did not see Ira as they crossed the hostel lobby. He hoped she had been successful in capturing the deserter, and vowed he would return to the hostel once Merlina was safely aboard the Turum, if Ira was not already there. Serenissima Nuva's primary sun was rising again, and by Zadok's estimation, they had less than an hour before they were scheduled to depart. Time enough if they made it to the alley door unhindered, but experience had taught him that time had a habit of disappearing when you needed it most. Clusters of morning shoppers made it easy to camouflage their flight, but not to move quickly. And questions to pedestrians about a tall man in a running corvid would make it impossible to hide which direction they had gone. Do you hear them? Zadok asked Merlina. Yes, she rasped. They are not far behind. Will we make it? She picked up speed, opening her wings slightly for balance, her talons clicking on the pavement like a countdown. Zadok knew that was all the answer he was going to get. The gap between shops where the alley door was located was brightly lit, and the thin seams of the opening to the maintenance shaft were visible if you knew where to look. There was no one there. Fulgar, Merlina panted. What about him? This is where they captured me, she said, leaving Fulgar alone to fight off a bunch of drunkards. Zadok saw dark drops of blood drying on the ground. That did not bode well. He stared at the door as they approached it, hoping that Fulgar had already passed through to safety and willing that they would too. Quickly, Merlina urged. They come. Zadok pushed Merlina through the opening, slipping in behind her, just as the mob reached the entrance to the alley. Zadok held the door open a sliver, not wanting the movement of the door closing or the sound of the latch to draw their attention. Merlina was already tiptoeing in the spaceport's direction. He could not blame her for wanting to get as far from her captors as she could. Where are they? A woman screamed. Keep going, others yelled. They can't be far. The mob moved away from the alley, and soon they were gone. Zadok listened until he could hear no more sounds on the other side of the door. Then he slid it shut as softly as possible. He ran silently, alert for any sound of pursuit. He soon caught up with Merlina, but his heart did not stop thumping in his chest until they reached the spaceport. To Zadok's relief, Ira was waiting for them when they entered the airlock of the Turum. Success. Merlina croaked at her. Ira nodded. I got him. She turned her eyes to Zadok. What happened to you? I had to rescue her, he jutted his chin at Merlina, who was slumped against a bulkhead. There's something we need to talk about. Yes, there is. But first, Ira looked at Merlina. Did you get the data? Fulgar's not here. Zadok demanded, his usually smooth voice sputtering in surprise. We got the data, Merlina said. Fulgar has it. We have to find him, she insisted. We were attacked, and we were fighting them when I was captured by zealots. She clicked her beak angrily. How much time do we have? Not very long, Ira said grimly. She raised her brows. Zealots? It's a long story. There's a plot to cut power to the spaceport and search ships, including ours, Zadok said. That border protector woman planted a locator on the ship. We have to find it and disable it. They're looking for corvids, Merlina said. No. They're after Gorban, Ira replied, eyes wide with understanding. We have to find Fulgar, Merlina argued. And we will, Ira said. Zadok, find and disable the locator. You were with the border protector when she was on board. You know what she had access to. She pushed past them toward the airlock. Merlina, guard Gorban. He has important intelligence for the OF, that's why they're after him. I'll find Fulgar. The airlock hissed as she released the seal. And prepare the ship for emergency departure, she added. Ira waited until she was far enough away from the ship to ping Fulgar's seats, hoping that it would not appear to be coming from anywhere near the Turum. She closed her eyes, almost laughing, as she felt herself instinctively trying to make her body as small as possible, as if that would reduce the chance her signal would be detected. Fulgar's frequency blazed in response. There he was, just a short distance away. He's at the eatery, she muttered to herself. Resisting the urge to run, Ira hurried to the Farron eatery. Ignoring the server who offered to seat her, she pushed into the crowd, head swinging as she searched for Fulgar. Ira, a familiar voice boomed. Fulgar was in the center of a group of men, all of whom sported evidence of a recent fight, including black eyes and split lips. One with a bandage on his head reached toward a table full of empty ale glasses, groping drunkenly until he found one that was still half full. It wobbled in his hand as he raised it toward her, unfocused eyes drifting across her face to the wall next to her. Join us, beautiful friend of Fulgar, he slurred. The bruised and battered men, in equally incoherent voices, enthusiastically echoed the invitation. Sadly, my friends, it is I who must depart, Fulgar said as he stood. It has been an honor drinking and fighting with you. What about your bird? The man with the bandage asked. Fulgar glanced at Ira, who gave him the tiniest of nods. "She'll turn up," Fulgar assured the man. "She always does." With much cheering and waving, Fulgar left the men and followed Ira out of the eatery. "Those were the men that attacked you and Merlina?" Ira asked. "Aha. All those men?" "Once I got a feel for their fighting style, it was easy," Fulgar chuckled, though Ira doubted it was as easy as he pretended. "If I had left them on the ground and they reported that one man with a corvid leveled them, the authorities could have identified us. The border patrol might have gotten suspicious and held our departure. I injured them enough to make them think twice and then offered to buy them drinks as a peace offering. Hopefully, they won't remember much if anyone questions them." "You drank with them after they tried to kidnap Merlina?" "I thought it was a good way to get intel about what's going on. Then I was going after her." He raised an eyebrow. "You can't tell me you haven't noticed something strange around here." She furrowed her brow. "You were cutting it close," she said. "I was watching the time. If you hadn't shown up when you did, I would have made my farewells and left. The timetable has been moved up." "Oh. I'll explain when we're back on board." Ira did not fully relax until they returned to the Turum. Once on board, Fulgar locked the data strand in a secured canister that, when sealed, would be camouflaged as part of the ship until military intelligence retrieved it when they reached Outer Forces headquarters. He rejoined his team just as Zadok discovered the locator. "What is it?" Fulgar asked as Zadok gave the locator to Ira. "Our border patrol officer left us a gift," Merlina answered. "What do you want me to do with it?" Zadok asked Ira as she examined it. "Throw it into the waste system," Merlina suggested. "What's this all about?" Fulgar asked. "A radical group wants to cut off power to the spaceport and search the ships," Zadok explained. "They are not radicals," Merlina said. "They are religious zealots. I listened to them after my seats countered the inhibitor, while they thought I was unconscious." "Gloomal followers," Ira said, as Merlina squawked in surprised agreement. "They say they're after corvids, but I think they're after Gorban," she added as she handed the locator to Fulgar. "They planted these to identify recently arrived Outer Union ships," Zadok explained. Fulgar held it up, turning it over as he examined it. "We must depart before they cut the power to the spaceport," Zadok said to Ira. Fulgar looked up from the locator. "Is there any way we can stop them?" he asked as he returned the device to Zadok. "Without knowing how they plan to do it." Zadok shook his head. "What about notifying the authorities?" "That would turn a spotlight on us that we don't want," Ira said. "Then we'll have to fight our way out," Fulgar said with a grin. "I have an idea," Zadok said. He held up the locator. "If I can link the locators, it would amplify the signals in all the ships and get someone's attention." "Enough to bring the authorities running?" Merlina asked. "I think so. They're so testy about unauthorized frequencies, I'd say definitely," Fulgar muttered. "We're scheduled to depart soon," Ira said. "Can you get it done in time?" Zadok was already disassembling the locator. "It won't take long." Within minutes, it was ready. After using components from the ship, nothing that can be traced back to the outer forces, Zadok assured Ira, he hid it near the spaceport administrative office after filing the Turum's departure documents. "Everything's set?" Ira asked as Zadok returned. "We're good to go." He toggled communications. "This is the Turum, requesting permission to depart." There was a long pause as the authorities checked to be sure they had filed the proper paperwork. Then, "Affirmative, Turum. Request granted. Safe travels." Under Fulgar's deft hands, the ship lifted slowly out of the spaceport. Zadok activated the amplified locator. Just as the Turum swung around for the climb out of the planet's atmosphere, they were rewarded with the satisfying sight of a squad of border protectors rushing out of the administrative offices. With any luck, the zealots had been thwarted. Chapter 9. The return journey to the first system was uneventful. To no one's surprise, Gorban preferred to remain in his quarters, and upon reaching Outer Forces headquarters at Alasia Station, he left the Turum under guard with a grateful smile for Ira. "Thank you, Ira of Sixton," he said as they escorted him off the ship. They had time to clean up and eat a hot meal before their debriefing with their commanding officer, Colonel Walsh, and his adjutant, Major Quallam. The team took seats around the small conference table in the colonel's office. The office had a magnificent view of Olympus Mons, its steep sides green with trees, but its peak was white with recent snowfall. They detailed the success of their mission, the retrieval of the data strand and of Gorban of Tersha, as well as what they learned from the Zealots and the message from Jarvo. Gorban claims he jumped ship after someone called Lumuul tried to get him to sabotage the Meridian, Ira said. But why did he run? He couldn't simply refuse. Major Quallam asked disdainfully. Or report it to his superior? Ira furrowed her brow. I don't know. He says this Lumuul is a deity that talked to him in his mind. The major glanced at Colonel Walsh. I'll make a referral for a psychiatric workup, she said. This may be a larger issue than the mental health of a single deserter, Merlina said. It was followers of that Lumuul who captured me. They said this Lumuul knows all. She rustled her feathers in annoyance. Perhaps a shared hallucination as a result of trauma. And they've got something against Corvids, Zadok added. They called them infiltrators, talked about capturing more. Merlina rattled with enjoyment at that descriptor of her people. They're from the IC. Fulgar asked. Gorban said he learned of Lumuul from refugees the Meridian picked up in the belligerents, Ira said thoughtfully. And it parallels the message I received from Jarvo about refugees on Serenissima Nuva. And don't forget the Glissandian, Merlina added. He's a leader among the Zealots. That's significant. My people are neutral, Zadok said sternly. You know that. Apparently not all of them, Merlina croaked. We'll include all this information in the mission analysis, Major Quallam said, clearly trying to prevent an argument. She turned to the colonel with an expectant look. He cleared his throat. Unless there's anything else, something unusual has come up, he said. We need your help. But it's a delicate matter and a voluntary assignment. A mission you will be able to decline without consequence. The Empyrean Guard stands ready to assist, Ira replied. The major tapped an interface panel on the table and engaged the room's security field. The colonel's office was now protected against electronic eavesdropping, and the auto-recording system would automatically save a record of the meeting in an encrypted and compartmentalized file on a separate database. Only the colonel, the chief of military intelligence, members of the military council, and Governor Dansom would have access. The team exchanged glances. From this point forward, everything discussed here is classified top secret, she said. Major Quallam nodded at the colonel and took the empty chair next to him as he spoke. Local security discovered intruders aboard the Ganymede Habitat Orbiter, he began. They were not implanted with seats and spoke a strange language that we could not initially translate. Even Munnan had a hard time understanding. That's difficult to believe, Merlina said with a rattle of surprise. Munnan is an expert on all languages currently spoken in the Outer Union. The story they told is almost as difficult to believe, the colonel replied. I see spies. Fulgar growled. Not spies, Major Quallam said with a scowl. They claim to be time travelers. Time travelers? Ira exclaimed. From when? They say they are from millions of years ago, the colonel answered. From Old Terra in the past. The team gaped at this revelation. What do they look like? Merlina rasped in her version of an odd whisper. They are Homo sapiens, Major Quallam replied, and are otherwise unremarkable. What does this have to do with us? Zadok asked. Time travel is illegal. If their claim is true, doesn't that make this a criminal rather than a military matter? Have they escaped? Is that what you need us for? Merlina asked, clicking her beak in anticipation. We'll track them down and bring them back. We need you to train them and accompany them on a mission into inter-coalition territory, Colonel Walsh answered. The whisper of Merlina's feathers was the only thing that could be heard in the silence that followed the colonel's statement. Fulgar was the first to recover. You want us to what? They claim they were sent here by an organization called the Temporal Protection Corps. They call themselves Najoni and Jonas and say they are Temporal Protection Corps agents. Their mission is to find a sabotage program that is broadcasting back through time. If it's not stopped, the program will destroy their time travel device, the Temporal Nexus, and potentially change the course of our history. Have you confirmed any of their story? Ira asked. Our records show that there was time travel in the distant past and that a Temporal Protection Corps oversaw it, but that's all we have, Colonel Walsh said. As you know, we lost most of our historical data during the Terran emigration. Their equipment does give off temporal readings, Major Quallam admitted. Which means it could be true, Merlina said, her onyx eyes sparkling. And this program they're searching for? Ira asked. We are detecting unusual frequencies coming from the location at which they believe the program exists. Which is where? Fulgar growled. On a planet called Coude, the colonel answered. In orbit of a dying red star. I've heard of it, Zadok said. There's an abandoned science station there. But it's deep inside IC territory. That's where the program appears to be transmitting from, the major said. And going there is our only option. Fulgar asked. There's no way to shut down the program remotely. Not that we can determine, Major Quallam answered with a frown. That's why an in-person mission is necessary. These time travelers know the technology, Colonel Walsh said. None of our people understand temporal equipment. And it would be a treaty violation if they did, the major added. What if this is a setup? Fulgar asked. A trick. There is that possibility. The colonel exhaled. We can't ignore this. If we do, we risk the IC possibly discovering time travel technology and using it against us, or worse, that failing to stop the program will change our history, he said. But we can't allow these people from the past, who do not know of our world, our technology, or of the IC, to travel behind enemy lines alone. They need training and they need protection, Major Quallam said. They need us, Leader Ira said. She stood, and the rest of the team came smartly to their feet. We accept the mission. The Empyrean Guard is proud to serve. The story continues in APSIS, The Adventures of the Empyrean Guard. Episodes of APSIS are available on Patreon, on the patron of the Empyrean Guard Pledge tier. You can also read episodes of APSIS on Kindle Vella. Go to linktr.ee/e.w.barnes to learn more. If you are listening on YouTube, links are in the show notes below, and please remember to like and subscribe. Thank you for listening.